Video's good.
Everything's good. Yep.
Yep.
You got it.
Video's good.
Everything. Yep. Everything's good. We looking good. Yeah, we're live here on YouTube. Welcome everybody. Exploring the Ka here on YouTube. This is another episode of the Space Water Podcast. This is episode 10, and we have our longtime friend and guest of the show, Mr. Gary Wayne, Christian contrarian, best-selling author, and an all-around great guy. You could find him at Genesis6Conspiracy.com. When Gary speaks, you'll see the books in the background. He just released part 2 of his Genesis 6 Conspiracy series, and it's really incredible. If you guys have not heard of Gary Wayne, you are in for a treat today. Space Water Podcast is in the house, and we turn up the heat. We have one of the most exclusive interviews here today and topics. Gary said he's never really talked about this on a full episode, only let out little clues and gems for people to bite on, but no one's really bit on the topic. So we're gonna do a whole topic today on the Thracian tribes and how they're connected to the Asura warriors of the Aryans, and also the mysterious cult of Orpheus, and how this is related to even the ancient Bulgaria area and everything. So it's a pleasure for me to spend some time with Gary once again and welcome him here to the Space Water Podcast. Welcome, Gary.
Well, thank you for inviting me back to your podcast. And yeah, so excited to talk about the Thracians. And I do reference the Thracians in book 2. So as they connect into some mysterious sort of figures and how we get a record, even though most people won't recognize it's the Thracians that are being talked about here, that has a lot larger influence on aspects of biblical history than what people think. And the other thing I think I'm going to like as we get into it is there's a lot of mysteriousness that is associated with Thracians and a lack of knowledge, and it's a lot older belief system and a lot older genealogies than what you're going to see in traditional sort of sources. And it really sort of reflects what I would call sort of the micro level of dualism in um, polytheism. And one of those aspects is this fight between good and evil. And as we take that into sort of the micro level versus the God level, that would show up in the demigods, and as we would understand them in the Bible as Nephilim. And in a sense that there is an occult understanding that there are white hats and black hats. There's good magic, there's black magic, there's that sort of micro dualism within the religion. And as such, good Nephilim and bad Nephilim that we would understand as the descendants of those giants today as the white hats and the black hats that get sort of talked about. And I think that's at play in this whole history of the Thracians, which is really hard to piece together. And you have to bring in clues from all sorts of different sources, and then you learn how surprising those sources are.
It really is. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, Gary. It really is hard to piece together about the Thracians. And I think that's why you see a lot of historians, from Lawrence Gardner to a lot of people, that tend to not even bring them up in the work.
Yeah, and I think that reflects that rivalry of the white hats and the black hats. And
Yeah. That's a great example, because who wants to give credit to certain cultures when they're the rival?
yeah, so if you notice Lawrence Gardner's, and he wrote many, many books and is an authority of the occult religion and the occult knowledge, and a historiographer and a genealogist for the royals. And so he's dealing with Western European bloodlines from the giants of the Anjou, the Plantagenet, not rival bloodlines that would be, from Indo-Aryans and Scythians, because they're the same kind of group, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And let's say the Putyanan bloodlines that were the original Scythians in Kiev. Or you don't see him talking about the Thracian bloodlines in that sort of manner, and you don't have the Basque bloodlines. It's because he's focused on his own sort of set group of genealogies that they are rivals for supremacy that has been going on throughout our history.
That's very interesting. And those names that you bring up too, it's very interesting. I think we should start with some of those ancient peoples and how this trickles down in these tribes, because Bulgarians and Bulgarian historians, they tend to want to talk about how Thracians are the oldest, one of the oldest cultures, if not the oldest cultures of Europe. But what they tend to leave out is that the Thracian culture may be old for the Europe, but it's coming from an older Aryan Sanskrit Vedic culture that split up, and then that you have all these different
Yeah.
tribes. And some of the words you said are interesting because I have that I've been working on some of the ancient Vedic peoples, and you have all these Vedic peoples that trickle down to those words that we use today, like Anunnaki and things like this. And the the five Vedic people that I'm talking about are the Puru, the Druyu, the Anu, the Yadu, and the Turvasa. And then they use that one of their biggest enemies was the Dazyu, who were these destroyers of the ancient Aryan Vedic people. So that's very interesting. A lot of those names you used are almost like derivative sound shifts of those words.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. And they should have interconnections if we're talking about the same kinds of people. So there is to understand post-Diluvian history, we need to understand the difference between parent gods and offspring gods. And the gods that ruled after the flood are the offspring gods. And that whether or not giants survive or are recreated or both, they are described, even from a biblical perspective, all of the different giant tribes that I talk about biblically in the Bible, in book 2, are described as aboriginals to the land. So from a biblical perspective, if we understand that Babel happens about 100 years after the flood, and that giants are the aboriginals of the land, these are the peoples that Babel are going to migrate around the world and go live amongst the aboriginals. And so when we look at, let's say, Greek religion and history and mythology, it is an extension out of and transliterations for the names of the gods that would go back to the original Indo-Aryans, or as in Italy, from where your ancestry comes from, as you know, but maybe all of the people in the audience don't know, is that the Etruscans were the original settlers and were another tribe of the Indo-Aryans. And there was like 4 or 5 major groups of these Indo-Aryans, and it's the original language that a lot of our words take its etymology back to. And many of the dialects of Indo-Aryan have ceased, like the Philistines, for example, but they're all sort of related and go back to the original main language, which is why you can get words that are going to show up in India to Persia to Asia Minor to Bulgaria onto the Crete Islands. There's a relationship there, and that there's some distinctions within the groups, but they are the aboriginals that are either survivors as demigod giants after the flood or are recreated by the offspring gods. So like Hercules with the Greeks, or Baal creating the Rephaim in the covenant land, and on and on and on. So I'll take this to throw out for people just so that they understand what I'm talking about here with the example as it comes down to the Thracians. So in Greek mythology and history and other sources, there's more than just the Greek sources on this. They say that the Thracians have a particular patriarch that they're named eponymously after. And that individual is Thrax. And Thrax is the son of the Greek war god Ares. So it would have a it would be the war god of the Indo-Aryans, and he wouldn't be known as Ares because that's the replacement sort of name of the offspring gods. And Ares is the same god that produces Romulus and Remus for the Etruscans and the Romans. And so you see how old that this goes. So when you get sort of the standard ideology that this is a religion that sort of pops up in a belief system of the religion of the Thracians and the various names of the religion that it's called around, let's say 600 to 700 BC, that is absolutely inaccurate as you take the older information about who the Thracians are back to their sources. And even in the time of the Romans, in the rule of Maximus, and this is like, I mean, thousands of years after the creation of the demigods, of the giants, as we would understand them, and from Ares as the celestial mafia godfather, as I would like to label him, a fallen angel. There's a Thracian that is 9 feet tall in the AD era of the rule of Maximus, and he's a giant gladiator. And and you just can't
Wow.
sort of make this stuff up. And so this is, I mean,
Wasn't
it's not one of,
Spartacus? Spartacus was too, right? He was a
yeah,
Thracian. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So they were known for being warriors. And they had this warrior tradition that sort of comes down. Now, 9 feet isn't as tall as as Goliath or Og or Gilgamesh, but understand how many years of dilution through intermarriage through humans so that they can continue to not go extinct, that you still have that size of warrior. And it's not that they were just tall, they were wide. They were muscularly strong. So they had generally a relationship of a 2-to-1 height to width ratio. So that if you have this one as it's an AD at 9 feet tall, he's going to be 4.5 feet wide versus the human status of 3-to-1. And so Og's bed, which was used as the standard for that and was made of iron because it wouldn't hold his weight, that bed was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. So on a royal cubit as the king of Edrei and Ashtaroth and worshiping the Baalim as one of the assemblies of the Tatanu, assembly of the giants at Mount Hermon underneath the assembly of the Baalim gods, he would be measuring to fit into that bed somewhere between 12 and 15 feet tall. And he'd be 4.5 to 5 feet wide. And he's a different kind of giant than what Gilgamesh is, who's a dark-haired giant, which is sort of related, as for background and context, to these giants may have been larger than the Rephaim of the Middle East. So these dark-haired giants, like Gilgamesh, and Nimrod is associated with them. I think a little bit of conflation in there, but there's no doubt he intermarried amongst these ones that we know biblically as Elam or Olam of Ancient of the East, because he stayed in Sumeria after Babel. And Gilgamesh, whether it's in the Ugaritic text or in the Sumerian text or in the Akkadian text, it's all the same. He is 11 cubits tall and 4 cubits wide. So he's bigger than Og. So he's 19 feet tall as king of Uruk and 7 feet wide. So a little bit larger than that general 2-to-1 of the Rephaim, but still very, very wide. And biblically, we get all these descriptions of these warriors and kings as stout. And that goes back to like Hebrew words like as and as for meaning strong, mighty, and stout and wide. And also the source words for Azazel, who was a warrior god and the destroyer god. So just tons and tons of connections. But that's just kind of setting some groundwork for the understanding that Thracians were the offspring of the gods and human females and were giants. Doesn't matter whether you call them heroes, titans, Anunnaki, all the words around the world that would call them as giants. They were giants, and they're a specific bloodline of giants.
That's awesome, Gary. I love when you start breaking stuff down like that, and people are talking about it in the chat room. I mean, having iron beds. I mean, imagine even stubbing your toe on an iron bed. Something crazy. But what you were saying is very interesting because what you said about the Etruscans, for many people that don't know out there, a lot of the origins of the Etruscans is pretty much lost in time, and people don't know where they showed up, and they had to have come from somewhere, and obviously they most likely derived, like Gary said, from these Aryan tribes that split up. But what you don't hear is that a lot of the hereditary mystic families in Italy, if you talk about where the origins of the Etruscans come from, they'll tell you that they got their knowledge from the Persians, but the Persians told them that they got their knowledge from the star people called the Inu or Anu. So that's very interesting. They say Inu kind of, but it's same thing as Anu. It's just a sound shift, right? It's the same thing with the Thrace. Like you mentioned the Thrace, right? I don't think we even know the true name of the Thracians. They were named by the Greek, if I'm not mistaken, and I
Yes.
know the Rome called Thrace gold Thrace.
Yes.
So
So
these
there would
aren't
have,
Aboriginal primitive people. These are highly technological people, but warrior
yeah,
savage type,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, we don't know whether or not that name was changed, was transliterated, and there's a basis to it, or a completely different name to fit, the culture. So, but what we do get is one particular patriarch, and going back to an offspring god and the war god, Ares. So, and it's kind of really sort of important to understand. And they had a royal city called Tyrodia, which most people aren't familiar with. And if that sounds rather odd as it's related to Thrax, here's how some of those kind of transliterations sort of get there. So the Thracians were known as uh, and understand the H sound in many of the language is an evolution. So let's say if you're looking at the old word of Nephilim, it would be Nephilim or Rephaim instead of Rephaim. So if you take it back to its old meaning, old sort of sound from a Middle East perspective that crosses cultures is that would be T I's in a I sound. So they were known, and according to Josephus and other researchers, as Tyrasians, which is really interesting, and or Tyras or Tyrus. And so Tyrus is thought to be um, uh, the city, one of the cities of the Thracians. And when you get King Tyrus, king of Tyr, that's talked about, um, it starts to give a sense of this was a very important bloodline, but just weren't there in Asia Minor and in the Anatolian Empire, where we get sort of information from as it comes down through history. But as you say, they're also in um, further up into Asia Minor, and they're also into Bulgaria as parts of their homes of this bloodline, and they're very much associated with um, the Persian Aryans. Not the same, but very much like a kin branch of the Achaemenids. And if we look at Indo-Aryan settlement of the dark-haired variety, they moved into Persia after the Olam or the Elam, and parts of that migration also settled in the Indus Valley. And now, so if you're going to look at words, let's say in the time of the Mitanni dynasty and the Hittite dynasty, you're going to see that religion and the same names of the gods and mentioned in treaties between some of these empires that will have the same gods as in Sanskrit. So you have the same religion and people of the dark-haired giants that are settling into the southern region of Greece, even on the islands like Crete, where the Philistines, and they were considered Indo-Aryans, and so you have Cherethim, which is Keret, as you take that back to the Semitic, and that was the island of Crete. And Cyprus would be part of that. And you have the Cherethim, you have the Pelathim, and the Casualhim of giant tribes of these dark-haired variety that's connected in with the Hittites, who are also described in that dark-haired variety, so suggesting they intermarried with the dark-haired giants. And you have this Persian and the Achaemenid, or the Persian kings, take their genealogies back to that dark-haired variety. And then you have the kings in the Indus Valley that are the dark-haired variety as well. So this was a much larger branch of the giants than sort of initially sort of understood. But if we understand there's 4 or 5 major segments to the Indo-Aryans, it starts to make some sense.
Yeah, there seems to be a duality with that. They're not, because when they say the dark, I think they're not just referring to being dark haired and dark skinned, but also dark of nature, right?
Yeah, because of that sort of dualism. So yeah, I think is a very good point. So you have 2 terms within the Indo-Aryan or Zoroastrian religion, as we would understand it as it emerged in Persia. Um, and they had good demigods and evil demigods. Good gods and evil gods, and everything is played out down that. So you have the good ones that were the Adityas, and known also as the Danovas,
Yeah,
and
they're
then
like the good
later,
seers, right? The
yeah,
Adityas are like the sun seers,
yeah,
the sun god seers. Yeah,
and then that then evolves down later in history to the Adityas being the Divas, and the Danovas as being the Asuras.
yeah.
So the
And the
Asuras
Devas
are,
would be like the Brahmins, right?
yeah,
And the Asuras are the Kshatriya warriors.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the Asuras are the evil ones, and the Divas are the good ones, and they're both shining beings.
Yep. Yep. That's amazing. So you have these that I've been talking about this as well on my Patreon in different places. You have these ancient Aryan tribes that obviously went to war over knowledge and how it was being applied on the planet, and these tribes broke out along the planet. And what we're taught in school is that there was an Aryan invasion. I really think it's more should be described as an Aryan division,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's really incredible. I mean, and it's a shame that they think of these tribes as being primitive because that closes the door with a lot of things. How can you say we're primitive when they're seemed like they were like almost mint pressing gold and doing all this elaborate things, Gary? It's
W-
incredible.
Well, they were provided knowledge after the flood, and I think there's a survival of knowledge after the flood. And there's all lots of different ways of how that knowledge shows up after the flood. And we have a degradation of that knowledge down through the history. But if you look at sort of the 3 sort of main gods of uh, the Thracians, as we understand that through the Greek history of it, with Greek names. Um, you have Mars or Ares as obviously important in their religion. You have Bacchus, which is a satyr god. Some people think that is the pan god, or some people also look at it, well, maybe that's not another god because Ares is the war god described as a ram and a goat. So there might be two gods there, but they seem to be maybe after they created the race, they degraded to satyr goat gods, maybe. And then, of course, the big one though that really starts to connect things is uh, Diana. So I'm thinking you have Dionysus, which is associated with Bacchus as that satyr god, and then in Ares may be a satyr as well, but not generally associated with a satyr, but described as a goat, as its meaning as a war god. And then Diana, which is the equivalent of Artemis, right? As the queen of the fair folk. And this is part of the fair folk. This is part of the tribe of Danu. This is the Datanu. And if you look at as the assembly of the Datanu, and these are the Tuatha De Danann and the She or the She race. So Datanu at the assembly in the Ugaritic text, you have a D and a T there, but the D and the T were interchangeable and had the same sound. So you would have that word show up biblically as Dadan. without the U on there, which is sort of an Eastern um, suffix added on. So you could also do that, pronounce that as Titan, just as you have the Greek Titans of heaven, and then their demigod Titan offsprings. That's just as Atlas is described as a Titan, son of Poseidon. And so again, we get these connections back to Anu and the Eastern giants as well. So
Yeah. You even got like right near Bulgaria, isn't it, where the Danube River is right there?
yeah,
Danube, I mean, geez.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and a lot of Christians would say that that was named after the tribe of Dan when they were migrated, but the math and the history doesn't work. So that comes later. So, and it's very, very common for mountains, rivers, cities, and places to be named after very famous heroes of old. So you have like Seir as Mount Seir. Seir is a Horim giant. You have Orontes, a Greek giant, and the Orontes River in Asia Minor. You have cities named after these uh, patrial and eponymously named tribes where they would have their royal city, the city of the original patriarch, the city of where they started their specific style of worship. So, yeah, so one would expect the Danube River would be named after the tribe of Danu or the Danua.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, there's so many cities that we can get into today that's even in
Yeah,
Bulgaria that are
yeah,
straight out of Aryan Sanskrit. That's
yeah.
incredible. And it
And
has to,
and another place just on the rivers thing is that the Thracians also were lived on a river called the Arg River.
wow, like the Argus.
Yeah, and that's Indo-European or Indo-Aryan language for white. So it's the
Wow. And
White River.
Orpheus was on the Argus, wasn't he? And he was one of the ones involved with the Jason and the Argonauts, I think. I
There's
think he
there,
was,
there's
if I'm not mistaken. In some of the one of the stories, I think Orpheus might have been involved with the Jason and the Argonauts. But I know,
well, Orpheus, as it sort of relates to the Thracians and their patriarchs. So
yeah.
yes, there's a connection that Thrax was with Jason and the Argonauts. And also he went into Hades to try and get his wife out of Hades because she had died.
Wow.
And that sort of gets into part of the Orpheus religion of the Thracians.
You know, many there's a few historians, not many, but that have talked about the possibility of an ancient Ark of the Covenant being discovered in Bulgaria or references of it because
Yep.
have you heard of the Tartarian tablet?
Yep.
And there's a Tartarian tablet and the other one that's called I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's spelled Grades Hnitsa Grechna, Bulgaria. It was discovered. It's it's they think it's a covenant, a first covenant tablet.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's lots of writings that are discovered in Romania and in the Transylvania region with cuneiform that predates the cuneiform that was written by the Sumerians. So it's probably from, obviously, I think when you get into that date, that's definitely pre-flood. So again, all of these artifacts in history, if it's not part of the generally accepted version of history, they set it aside. It's like artifacts, what they call UParts, out of place artifacts. So, and the other thing I forgot to mention earlier is that um, I'm sorry, it wasn't Thrax that went. You're right, it was right. It was Orpheus, but we don't know how old Orpheus was. He would have certainly done that well before 600 or 700 BC that they generally date him
Yeah.
to. And he's also has a genealogy that goes back to Zeus on one side, and to another god on the matriarchal side, or matriarchal is Zeus, and I think Ares is the other side. So there may be a conflation of Orpheus and Thrax, but because Orpheus has to be a lot older, because going with Jason and the Argonauts, that's way before traditional understanding of the Orpheus religion, and he was a Thracian bard, a prophet, a poet, and a singer. Um, and he's the one that went into Hades, right, to get his wife Eurydice. And also, what's interesting is
Yeah.
is with the Argonauts, he was searching for the golden fleece, which
Yeah.
was the material that the gods used to make their clothes out of to extend the life of the physical body in the earth.
Yeah. Which
And the
had
demigods,
something to do with the sun and some
yeah,
other kind of, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever that technology was, it's allegorized as the golden
Plasma.
fleece. Yeah,
Yeah. Plasma. Who knows? But yeah, that's interesting with Orpheus. I mean, let's talk about Orpheus a little bit because I mean, Ovid talks about him,
yep,
Virgil,
yep,
Homer, and he's talked about as this mysterious figure who enchanted all creatures, even the gods,
yep,
even the gods.
yeah,
And he was said to be born in the Rhodope Mountains, the place where there's, I mean, Bulgaria alone, there's thousands of dolmens and megaliths, literally. And
yep,
he was said to be the only one that was able to stop the sirens wail
yep,
with the Argonauts, I think. That
yep,
with his music, if
yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
Well, yeah, because he was, a uh, obviously some sort of bard or sorcerer, or ability to enchant or charm is how it's sort of described. And he would do, and that was typically done through certain words or in music or things that are written on stones and stuff like that. And so, yeah, he was thought of as an inspired singer, which is why there's a lot of um, theatrical and music that is associated with him, coming downstream. And he received knowledge from Pythagoras, which goes way back. And there's more than one sort of Pythagoras, but it's the Pythagoras sort of mystery schools where some of that knowledge comes down. And Orpheus was a reformer of Pythagoras knowledge, is sort of how he sort of understood. And that knowledge was passed on to Plato and into Greek philosophy. And of course, Plato wrote uh, Timaeus and Critias about the antediluvian epoch in Atlantis. So it's just amazing some of the connections that are there. So yeah, so he's from Ares, from a not immediate son, but as part of that genealogy, and then Zeus from the mother side. So he's got matriarchal bloodlines, and he has patriarchal bloodlines, which means when that comes together, that was a coming together of a new dynasty of kings and royals and areas that they were given the divine right from the gods to rule from. So what the connection is to Orpheus and Thrax, they may be the same, they may not be, but the Orpheus religion goes back to the original Indo-Aryan religion. So it is old. So again, and as you might mention, maybe Thrax isn't the original name, that's the Greek name, and maybe it's Orpheus, because there seems to be
Yeah.
almost like a nexus point of those two individuals as being the most important parts of the Thracian society and religion.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things that go along with I think also with the music that they're talking about. It's like he knows the music of the stars and the universe and
Yeah.
how to harness it.
He
You
does.
know?
He controls all of that. Yeah, and that's part of, I mean, it wasn't just, the ability to persuade or put somebody into maybe a hypnotic trance. I
It
mean,
was
this
much
was
deeper.
it
Yeah.
was much and stronger and recognized. And his temples that he set up with were known as places of prophecy. So, and then if you understand that it's seemingly, and you have Sibylline temples and religion that are operating in the same areas throughout history. It seems to be part of that original proto-Indo-Aryan religion. And Sibylline, I
Yeah.
think, in a lot of ways, is very, very similar to the Orphic
Oh yeah.
mysteries.
There's said to be ancient, some of the oldest Sibylline temples in Peppercorn.
Yeah,
In Peppercorn, in where they're and in fact, there's things that I heard about Orpheus that he was actually slain by Thracian women seers because he invaded Dionysus rites. And I think
yeah,
Dionysus is, the people don't tend to say this, Gary, right? I think some of the oldest knowledge we have of Dionysus comes from Thracians.
yeah, yeah. I think you're right. And again, Dionysius, however you want to pronounce
Yeah,
that.
Dionysius. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. There's different, everybody pronounces a
Yeah, I
lot of
might have
these
said it
names
wrong. Yeah.
differently. Well, no, there's just different ways you can pronounce it depending on which uh, uh, language you're getting the pronunciation out of. And so, um, yeah, I think that that's exactly what's going on. And Dionysius is not the original name because the Greek pantheon is based on the older pantheon, just with more more recent vernacular names, just as the Roman pantheon is based on the Etruscan pantheon. And it's likely the same pantheon because Etruscans were Indo-Aryans as well. And another thing to keep in mind is that Dionysius had a scepter that was a very powerful weapon, and that this word was understood as Thyrus or Tyrus, as we are talking about the H sound.
Wow.
Yeah, and of course that name Tyrus is what shows up, and he's this great king of this dynastic king of part of an empire where the Thracians would have ruled. And what's also interesting about as you take all of that back to Tyrus, is Tyrus is not only the founder of the Thracians, but he's a brother of Meshech and Tubal and Magog and Gomer in the Bible.
Wow, that's incredible.
And Meshech and Tubal um, and Gomer are all part of these original Indo-Aryan races. And
That is
Meshach and
incredible.
Tubal are associated with Magog, right? That goes into the
Huh.
Gyges kings, which were Herculides bloodlines. In other words, dynastic descendants of Hercules, son of Zeus and alchemy. There's this parallel bloodline of kings, and they're operating all in the same area, whether or not it's in Assyria, in Persia, in Anatolia, as in Asia Minor, whether it's in Scythia, whether or not it is a little bit north as you get into the Ukraine or to Romania, over to Greece. They're all part of almost side by side, dotted, intersected types of kingdoms. And I wonder whether or not there's a real separation and there's a rival in there, or they're all part of the same original culture. But I go back to that white hat, black hat, that I think there is an old rival within there that they separated into the Devas and the Asuras.
Yeah. And maybe like you said, Orpheus started something new because he seemed to be of the Thracian Asuras, but also part of the Devas,
Yeah, yeah,
you know? And they start like a whole new, and he started a whole religious belief system that had to do with the
yep,
movement of souls and the travel of souls. And some of the most important moment was at the moment of death where they had these hymns. And these are right derived from Vedic hymns. And what's interesting, Gary, mo most people don't know this. They knew, the Thracians knew the ancient name for Osiris,
yep.
Asar.
SR. Yep.
They knew about this. I mean,
Yep,
that's
from
incredible.
Mesopotamia. Yeah, exactly. They did. So there's more communication amongst the older civilizations than what people believe. So now, when you look at this Orpheus religion, and maybe this is part of reflecting the sort of ancient shift. And we talked about Orpheus, that he went down to Hades to try and get his wife out of there. If you look at that religion, it's a little bit unique in the aspect that it tried to free the divine soul, the immortal spirit from the God and or the fallen angels, as we would understand that from a Christian perspective, from the sinful body. And so in polytheism, they don't talk about the spirit, they talk about the soul. And even though they understand that that's the dwelling place for the spirit, it combines, it merges, right? And that spirit stays in this earth, in the physical world, but they want to be able to separate in the belief system this divine spirit, the spark of the divine. The thousand points of light, as we might know it through the Bushes in their speeches. They want to try and end reincarnation that they believe in. They want to be able to become a god. And in that belief system, what is really odd, not necessarily directly related, but in Odysseus, you have this accounting of seeing uh, of Hercules as being this doleful spirit within Hades, and also within the same narrative as being elevated as a god on Mount Olympus. And it can't be both. And there might be two different spirits. There might be an ancient Hercules, uh, Hercules versus Hercules that's been conflated over time. But it's odd that you get this accounting, and Hercules is also equated again in the Asia Minor area and in locations as being um, associated with the first pantheon of gods after the floods and the god Melkart out of the Baalim, uh, which is really kind of weird and is recognized as the worship of Hercules. And that makes no sense because he would have had hero worship, but not as a member of the Baalim, but as a original god whose name may have been changed over time from the original pantheon. That might be the reference.
Yeah, that gets confusing when you have these references of the names. It's like, wait, how can this be? Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's impossible. And there is the Heracles and Hercules. I'm not sure if it's the same figure or if they're adapted names, or it seems to be a title for a solar hero in many
Yeah.
areas, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's two different beings from the only way I can sort it out, A, on the time frame, and B, on what they did and where they dwelled. So it may be possible that uh Hercules was named after a god of that
Yeah,
name,
yeah.
which is not uncommon because, for example, in the Ugaritic text, you get the god Amur, and then there's demigods that are servants of the gods that is named Amur as well. And that would suggest that Amur, and it might be the source name for the Rephaim, who intermarried with Canaanite daughters to create the Amorites, is that sort of etymological or patriarchal and eponymous sort of relationship. So it's not uncommon. So like even with Gilgamesh, I mean, in the Book of Giants, in Enoch, you have a Gilgamesh before the flood. And then you have Gilgamesh after the flood. So it was common to name giants, after the flood, after names before the flood. So they had
Even
knowledge of those
Nimrod,
names.
even Nimrod's like that. It's confusing. And Enoch, I
Yeah,
mean, it's different
yeah,
Enoch.
yeah. And also with people like that show up in the Bible, or as we talked about, as a brother of Tyrus here, his name is Magog, and Magog was and Gog and Albion, just three of the more famous ones, were offspring before the flood of Iapetus as part of the original parent gods, not part of the Zeus reign after the flood, but Poseidon sort of inherits that mythos. So I think that's what happens as well, where we get this sort of conflation that they inherit the parent god's mythos. But you have giants after the flood named Gog and Magog as well as part of the Gyges.
It's
Your sound
incredible.
is there.
Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yep.
incredible too how I mentioned earlier how some of if for people that want more proof about the direct Aryan Sanskrit connection with Thracian and ancient Bulgaria, some of the cities and places all over Bulgaria. One of them is Varna.
Yep.
Varna is they talked about the Varna people, the Varna culture. Um, they're basically a Sura Deva mixed with the Varna. Varna comes right out of ancient Rig Veda. I found it right in the Rig
Yep.
Veda, and it actually is a term with the Brahmins that can mean a quality of energy belonging to a person,
Mhm.
and it occurs right in the Rig Veda, and it has to do with verses that they're talking about the Asuras being derived from a fallen Kshatriya warrior tribe.
Yeah.
So that's incredible.
Yeah. And they would name their places and temples after gods, after demigods, after people who started a tribe or a nation. And those were all either, literally gods or fallen angels and or their offspring, which were the giants. And it's part of, if you want to, it's one of the things that I did as I tried to take giants in book two back to a specific patriarch is to link in the patrial naming, the meaning of the name, how that name crossed other cultures, but using the patrial aspect that they name cities, mountains, rivers, temples after gods and demigods is a key to really sort of starting to take you back to how nations received certain names. And I think in a lot of cases in the Bible, as what we've been talking about, is I think that the original names of the Noahites that went to live amongst the giants as the Aboriginals after Babel, biblical writers changed their names to the giant tribes that they went to live amongst, which is how they cross over. That's why we have Tyrus. That's why we have Meshech. That's why we have Tubal. That's why we have Gomer, all associated with the Scythian giants located in the biblical, not as giants, but as Noahites whose tribes and names were changed, just as Elam would have had their name changed to those eastern giants, the Ben Kadim, the ancient ones of the east.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's interesting. They say that too. I mean, there's a verse here that goes along with that. What you're talking that goes right along what you're saying that I wrote down to having a little. Well, there's a verse here that goes along with what you were saying that I think you'd be interested in hearing that I wrote down. It's from the Rig Veda, ancient Aryan Sanskrit, Vedic. That this is the oldest of the Vedic is the Rig Veda. It's verse 763. It says, "Who have no will, binders, whose speech is harmful, traffickers who have no faith, who give no increase, who do not sacrifice. Agni attacked those Dasyus from the east. He drove the unholy ones to the west."
Yeah, there you go. That's that sort of division that we're talking about. And another thing to keep in mind as we talk about these various groups of peoples is four or five. In Old Persia, the name Arya means a noble family of a kind. And
Wow.
that, yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And in Sumerian, Eri was understood as a race of giants and shining ones.
Yeah, they were Puranic writings too, they call them
Yeah,
like Puranic writings and the Aryans or the fallen Aryans end up being these Kshatriya Asura warriors that
yeah,
come down to Bulgaria and some of these towns that have Vedic names and some of the places, Gary, are incredible. Have you one of the places is Stranya. I think I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but
yeah,
it's spelled Strandza or something like that,
yeah,
Stranya.
yeah,
And like there's certain areas in there where the forest of Stranya, the trees grow back faster than they can be cut down
yeah,
because certain caves have high radiation in them, they say.
yeah,
And it's a legend that actually came out with this guy. I have his name somewhere. I could get it in a minute. he was sort of the equivalent to the Bulgarian KGB. They
Yep.
could he was a state security agent or whatever. And in 1989, when there was democratic changes in the area, his memoirs came out, and he talked
Well,
about that he was going on archaeological expeditions in Strania and different places, and they discovered the tomb of Bastet, which was an Egyptian goddess in Bulgaria.
yeah,
Very,
yeah,
first of all, how can a god die? So it's obviously not a god. It's sort of this
yeah,
Asura Deva
yeah,
queen or
yeah.
something, and that's interesting, right?
And associated as the Queen of Babylon, as Bastet is associated in a lot of
Wow,
occult
yes.
understandings, and associated with the Sibylline uh, goddess as well. So again, a lot of things, and when you start to understand that, Cadmus is in this era of Thrax as well. And he's the one who starts Thebes, and he marries a wife from the Mount Hermon region.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, so he has influence um, in the Covenant Land region from Greece, and starts the Egyptian original civilization, and thought to be part of the source name for the Cadmanim, or the QDM, the Ben Kadim, which are the giants of the East again. So it's just was so much going on between the civilizations after the flood that this has just been silenced for so that people don't have, I think, a proper understanding of what was really going on back there, because it would lead to a lot of questions that I don't think that they want to they want to answer.
That's so true. That's so true. And what's interesting too is that there's an issue in Bulgaria. I know many people don't want to talk about it because it's really a poor, very poor, one of the I don't know if it's the poorest, but it's one of the poorest countries in Europe. Very poor.
Yep,
So all these there's rumored to be up to 15,000 burial mounds and tombs all over Bulgaria, most of
yep,
them unexcavated because
yep,
nobody can afford excavation.
yep.
And there's said
Well,
that the
and
Bulgarian
it's
mafia, is,
yeah,
is a problem.
and it's been blocked off for so many years because of politics to be able to get in there, just like in
Thousands
places
of
of
years,
Turkey. Yeah,
nobody's been in some of those mounds. So you have like ancient Thracian gold that can change the
yeah,
Bulgarian economy.
yeah,
But the bloodlines out there seem to be paying off the Bulgarian mafia to get in the
yeah,
way of the museums and the archaeologists, and they're not getting the Thracian gold. There's probably Bulgarian mafia tonight going into mounds getting
yeah,
Thracian gold. You know, it's incredible.
yeah. Crazy stuff. So, and I think we're going to see more and more of these, you know, information that comes out. Now, what happens to it once they start to do some of the archaeology? Well, that's a whole different ballgame in the whole effort to control the information. But there was a lot more going on early after the flood and before the flood than science in the standard world system wants to admit to. So,
Yeah, and the Egyptian and Thracian connection is just, I mean, you can't deny it. I mean, they even have a Valley of the Kings, Valley of Roses
yep,
in Bulgaria. Yeah, Rhodope is the place that I was very interested in about the megaliths there, and that was an area that Orpheus was said to be born and died, and
hmm,
and they said that he could be buried in those Rhodope near the Papericon,
yep,
in the Papericon rocks. And it was interesting is that they said he was slayed by woman seers, possibly sibyls.
yeah. Well, probably. I mean, you'd have to have people of the occult had that occult knowledge and power. So, I mean, the symbols of the Phrygian religion. I mean, that was the source for Etruscan and a lot of the Anatolian and a lot of the Greek religion, as what we've talked about before. So this is Indo-Aryan, and also connected, as a branch of Samothrace and the larger Indo-Aryan races. So you have that sort of flowing sort of in between. And I just sort of look at uh, all of this history that is out there, and if you can find a way to sort of connect adults, and that's like a Thracian amulet where there was writing on it that I talked about Orpheus and the stones and the amulets that they would use to try and help harness some of those powers. That's exactly what it's talking about, and that's a script that's on there. I don't know whether or not they're actually able to translate that as one of the dialects of Indo-Aryan.
Yeah, this is one of the amulets I was talking about with there's the Tartarian amulet and all these amulets, and this is one of the Thracian ones. And interesting too is we could get to it another time on another show maybe, but I found very interesting plasma and solar phenomenon here. The plasma columns and different things that go along with
Hmm.
some plasma models like Anthony
Yep,
Perrot and different people have made. So they
yep,
might be talking about ancient aurora and an increase in solar wind and solar
yeah,
activity.
yeah. And another thing that's sort of interesting as I look at that has, and I don't know whether there's any connection there, but it's kind of like the how the languages and the words are formed in writing in China and Japan. Like you see similar sort of forms that
Yep.
would suggest a similar sort of sourcing of writing, right? And they all evolved, obviously, but there seems to be a similarity there that I hadn't noticed before.
Yeah, I'm glad I showed you that. I mean, there's so much of that I have. A good book if you ever want to see it as well is this guy I think he passed already, Dr.
Yeah,
Stephen Guide. He
yeah,
has a book called The Thracian Script Decoded.
yeah,
I don't agree with exactly what he's saying. I actually have my own theories about, but he brings to light a lot of things and about a lot of the Thracian script that you guys can
yeah,
see some of the amulets there.
yeah. And did you find any links to the Kabiri with the Thracians?
Yeah, I mean the Kabiri is a very interesting topic. Madame Blavatsky talks about a lot about the Kabiri and her work and how they're related to the giants. I think there's a direct relation to the Kabiri and also a lot of lore that has to do with uh seven kings,
Yeah,
seven rays of light,
yeah,
the constellation of the Great Bear and the
yeah.
celestial ship of the North.
Okay.
So I found a lot of that has to do with the Kabiri as well, and it's linked directly to the Thracians in many ways.
Yeah, that's my research is they're somehow connected to the Thracians, and some references to um, Phrygian religion, and a lot of information that's associated with again the Turkey region again about them. And what about the Khazars? Uh, have you connected them at all to, other than being Scythian? They're in the Kiev region, but have you made any connections with them, possibly with the Thracians?
The Khazars, is that like to me that sounds just like Asar.
Well, yeah, it would be.
I
Yeah,
never really
yeah,
got into the Khazars. What's
yeah.
explain that more with me with
Well, I'd like to know a little bit more because I understand them as a branch of the Scythians and as the blonde-haired
Oh wow, yeah.
variety, and that they were the ones who settled in the Kiev region, just that established the original Tsar dynasty there. And they're the Tartars, as they're also called, which are Scythians as well, and part of that Tartarian
Yeah, that's
mythos. As that,
directly Thracian. Yeah, they're directly related to the Thracian.
yeah. So I'm just wasn't. What I haven't been able to figure out is what the interconnection was there, and whether or not, um, and which side of that good and evil that they were on in the ancient times. Not that it really matters that much today, but understanding the Tartarian movement to the east in the north versus the dark-haired ones in the south. I mean, you have the Roman Empire being a branch out of Moscow, which has the root word as its etymology goes back to Meshech, a brother of
Yeah,
Tyrus,
yeah,
as we were talking about those as connections, and that also the Khan dynasty takes their um, lineage back to the Scythians, and all of these were masterful horsemen as part of the
Yeah.
Indo-Aryan trait of being, masters of doing war and riding from the horse, and the creators of the chariot and the inventors of the iron that would reinforce the chariots that began to make the better weapons. It's all part of that whole history.
Yeah. I
So I
mean,
was,
The Kabiri too, they're like directly descendants of the fallen angels, because like that's how they're described in many things. I mean, in Arabic, the great Arabic Venus they call was called the Kabir the Great, and when she was bearing her child, they talked about that she was part of the Kabiri, and they were the seven stars of the constellation of the Great Bear, the Great
yeah,
Goddess Mother.
yeah.
So,
So
I mean, that seems to be like a fallen angel.
yeah, so some of the etymology that I got was from some sort of a connection to Zeus and Hera. Um, but
Yeah.
wasn't able to sort of distinguish that. And you also got to be careful as you're putting pieces together, because some of the sea nymphs were kind of called Kibera as well, which was, I found
Yeah.
interesting, but I didn't know how that sort of fit in as well that's just from my memory of doing research, but it's kind of one of those things that is out there on the Kibiri that I've not really sort of been able to fit in terms of how they fit in, or the Khazars totally.
Yeah, I got to get into the Khazars now. Now you got me on that word. I'm going
Yeah.
to start looking deep into my records and my archives about that word and see if it pops up a lot of places. I haven't looked for that one that much.
Yeah.
Definitely,
But
with other words.
another interesting relation just back on Thrace, is another area they lived on was the Hebros River, and that means goat. And then you look at the satyrs and the Bacchus, and you're going, that's just none of that can be by coincidence.
Hand of the goat or something like a lot of them.
Yeah,
It's like so. Yeah, yeah. It's incredible. I mean, the Thracians, they seem to be not just masters in gold workings as well, but they weren't just warriors. They had a spiritual aspect to them as well.
yeah, yeah,
So I mean, Orpheus started these all these hymns to the afterlife.
yeah. One of the things that I think, and it's helpful for people to understand history, is just what you said. You can't separate the culture from the religion. It's one of the same, and the rulers of the religions are part of one of the same, because they're the offspring of the gods that they're worshiping. So if you really want to understand the cultures, you have to understand the gods and where that all fits in. But again, people like to sort of separate those things and not want to connect those dots. But it was rather organized cultures, and we're talking about technology that it took millennia to catch up again after that technology was lost, probably through wars.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there's ancient Bulgarian things that were burned as well, just like Alexandria,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know. And I think there's so much that's probably going to be discovered in the future. That's most likely why they made a lot of things out of red granite and granite, because you have a high content of quartz crystal in there,
yep,
and maybe there's things recorded in the quartz that we don't even
yep,
realize.
yep. That's they would have found ways to try and have those things sort of survive. So I
Yeah,
agree with that. Yep.
yeah, that's very interesting right there. Is there anything else you wanted to go into with the Thracians?
No, no, they're still one of those puzzles I'm still putting together, but I found as I was doing more research, for book two, I was able to sort through some of that. But they are, to me, I would consider them like the Basques, that and in their mythos, they viewed themselves as Homo Atlantis. I don't know that you're familiar with that,
Oh
and
wow.
that they were survivors of the flood, and that they started the Egyptian. Um, civilization after the flood, the Mesopotamian civilization after the flood, the civilization in Asia Minor, and then migrated to northern Spain and southern France. And their language is still unlike any other language out there. And they believe that they were the purest bloodline of the antediluvian giants. And when the royals and the giants and their families moved and migrated over time and through wars to Europe and took over the kingships there got to be a power struggle. And of course, you have the Basque diaspora because of that. And so
Yeah.
the Western Europeans are always trying to eliminate more pure bloodlines. So they're more of a scion bloodline. So that's why they created social masonry to take care of the Putyanan bloodline, which was ruled with the from the 1600s on with a junior offshoot of the Romanovs. You have social masonry that basically turned into National Socialism in Germany, and then ended up taking the Kaisers down, which eventually
Wow.
reduced the
Wow.
the Habsburgs, and then they launched social masonry or communism on China, and it took down the Shah dynasty and the bloodlines from the dragon creator's god of the sons of heaven. And that's all within this rivalry thing and the geopolitics that goes on in the world. So you have pushback by some of those bloodlines, I think, or wannabe bloodlines in China and Russia saying, we don't disagree with a New World Order. We just disagree with the Western Europeans' model of a world order, and we don't think we can live symbiotically with you because of what you've tried to do to us over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean these bloodlines, this new world order is definitely it's in the workings in many ways. You could see the way we get squeezed with all the knowledge nowadays. I mean, and how people get silenced. And there's little clues out there. You guys, that when the truth gets put out, you see what happens to the truth. It gets smothered a lot of times. And in 1989, Gary, look up if you get a chance, to look it up. Operation, for people out there that want to look it up as well. Operation Sunray, I believe it was called, in Bulgaria. As soon as 1989 came and those democratic changes
Yep,
came with the communism,
yep,
they
yep,
they went digging
yep.
like for 4 years. Man, let's remember how poor is this country,
Yeah,
and they're spending millions of dollars to go digging,
yep, yep,
looking for some ancient technology that had to do
yep,
with a crystal box and to deter comets from hitting the planet. And
yep,
and there were psychics that were guiding them,
yep,
and they said that Baba Vanga gave them, and that's another one. You think that it could be Baba Vanga, who's basically one of the most famous people to ever come out of Bulgaria. She's a
yep,
prophet, right?
yep.
And she for people that don't know, she got pulled off the ground by like a tornado or a cyclone as a kid, and she got deposited into the yard near her and head first into the mud, which made her blind. And then she became like a seer and
Wow.
did a lot of prophecies.
Yep.
And Baba Vanga predicted the 9/11, they say, and a lot of other things. But I remember when I was a kid in the 1980s, she was still alive. I remember my grandmother was talking about her, seeing her on TV.
Yep.
And she supposedly was getting these ancient prophecies given to her. I mean, it's
Wow.
possible that ancient Bulgarian symbols
Yep.
were being channeled through her.
Yep. Yep. Something was being channeled through her anyways.
Yeah, did you ever see
Yeah.
pictures of her? She's got her eyes
No.
always closed, like
No.
she's, yeah, Baba Vanga. Wait,
Okay.
I'll show you real quick. I'll look her up real quick. Hold on before we go anywhere. Uh, Let me just pull it up. Oh, now the computer's not wanting to pull up the thing on here. But you guys can look it
That's
up.
okay.
Baba,
Yep.
her name's Baba Vanga. She's an older lady. I know she was still alive in the 80s, but she's
Yep.
definitely dead by now.
Yeah.
But yeah, she supposedly was a seer. And that area, you got the area of Tatul in Bulgaria, which has a lot of necropolises and things
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
And Orpheus is definitely said to be a Thracian warrior. Gary, it's been an amazing show. We've been dropping bombs of info the whole way. I really appreciate you coming on. And we got you booked. You're going to be on hiatus for a little bit,
Yep.
right? You're going to be
Yep.
doing audio.
Yeah, I'll be going to my cottage starting about the 1st of June and just doing audio. We're going to be continuing to do shows, but you have to show a picture of me. So yeah, so if people are interested in any of my books, book one or book two, best way to is to go to my website, genesis6conspiracy.com with the number 6conspiracy.com. And on the website, there's a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book one and all 84 chapters of book two, so you get a good feel for the book, and even the table of contents is going to grab your attention. And you can get a signed copy from me from the book, or you can link over to amazon.com, amazon.ca, barnesandnoble.com, and over to Kindle. And I'm very happy to let people know, and I got an update today that Amazon, through ACX and working with another partner for producers, will have book one out on audio, hopefully by the end of June. They're on chapter 21. They've completed that. I have to look and listen to some of those. And then book two will be out on audio for September. And then I'll put links up from my website for that as well. So very excited, but they give you an idea of how much information is in that book, and the information just doesn't stop coming. It's estimated book one will be 60 hours on an audio version to listen to.
Wow, 60 hours.
Yeah.
That's epic. That's epic.
So
That's like more than the Mahabharata or something like that.
yeah, so it won't be one of your less expensive audio books. So look for around maybe $26, I think is the estimated price.
Oh, that's way worth it. What, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's definitely worth it. Holy crap. That's a good price for that,
Yeah.
actually.
Well,
Yeah.
and the audio market has risen and grown significantly. I mean, I'm not sure how big it is right now, but it's bigger than digital, and maybe even bigger than the written. It may be the bigger piece of the market right now.
Wow. And you know what? It would be good for people if you can afford it to get the book with the audio. It'll help you read better.
Yeah.
Go
That,
along, read it while it's
yep.
being, and it'll help you learn how to pronounce some of the words you may not have heard before.
Yep.
And things like that as well. So everybody, the legendary author when it comes to the Bible and the conspiracy in Genesis 6, Mr. Gary Wayne. No one does the grind better than Gary Wayne. He is doing podcasts all the time, everybody. If you're looking for it, you can binge, go through all of Gary Wayne's shows and you'll find more and more each time. The books, Genesis 6 Conspiracy 1 and 2, you can get everywhere you buy books. Once again, it's genesis6conspiracy.com, everybody, and you guys know where you can find me. Thanks again. This is the Space Water Podcast, and we